Hey everyone. It's not like I didn't already suspect this because, yeah, I actually live in the real world and I pay attention, meticulous attention to the going ons in regards to the social, political, and economic atmosphere or pulse of the nation. And what I've noticed over the culmination of all of my adult years, now, like I say, in the early years, I was just as ignorant, as blissfully ignorant as most, but being the kind of person I am, that I just, everything I do, any endeavor that I undertake, I don't want to be at the bottom. I don't want to be at the middle. I want to be at the top. So if it's an intellectual endeavor, I want to understand things as best as I possibly can. So I'll take information from, political structures or entities. I'll take information from philosophical, historical, geographical, scientific, whatever information I can cram into my head that will at least give me some semblance of understanding. That's always the basis for me in, like, basically any endeavor I undertake. I never seek to be like a middle of the pack kind of guy or just kind of fly under the radar. No, I am the kind of person, I have that kind of personality where, and I guess my competitive spirit, combine all that stuff and my inherent ambitions. And no, I always seek to elevate myself to a substantial degree. And as a culmination of that, it has placed me in a position where I have a tremendous amount of understanding in regards to the social, economic, political structures and what that entails. And like I say, I've looked at the historical precedent that I'm at least knowledgeable enough to know about. And I've seen that in particular, now I would say one demographic that stands out in particular, it's the baby boomer cohort. Now you can make an argument to a lesser degree for even their parents, the silent or greatest generation. But no, I say I'm going to lay most of the burden of guilt at the feet of the boomers. And I've seen it, like I say, just use your own personal, even anecdotal experience, because when you're talking about government and demographics, as much as people try to suggest otherwise, no, it could be breaking down to, like, think about it, because politics and demographics, it's just a representation, it's a larger representation of your own personal situation or circumstances, for the most part. So if you have the kind of parents, like if you're like myself and you're a Gen Xer and you have parents or people in your family from that generation that have always seemed to want to socially or economically enslave their future generations or the unborn as a means to prop themselves up, or always seek to use government as a means to an end to oppress or suppress other people as long as they get to benefit socially or economically. Like I say, the baby boomers definitely, and like I say, I'm going to leave lots of caveats here, folks. If you're not one of those boomers, then don't get mad at me for pointing out this reality. If you're an outlier or an exception to the rule, then just accept that I'm not talking about you. But yes, the boomers seem to be one of those generations that seem to be more than willing to try to absorb and soak up as much of the national income, because that's what we're talking about when you're talking about GDP figures or federal debts or provincial debt. They're looking to, like I say, everything since they've come to age and became politically active, we've seen decades and decades where everything that's done seems to be in a manner that is completely beneficial to that particular demographic. And seemingly always at the sacrifice of successive demographics, or maybe even their own parents, right? Like, maybe not so much as far as their own parents, but as far as the successive generation things go, well, because that's how it works when you're talking about debts, right? Like, if you assume a lot of debts, well, you're not going to be able to offload that to your grandpa, because your grandpa is going to die before you do, right? Or your parents, because they're probably going to die before you do. So it's always going to be, when you're talking about debts and deficits or unfunded liabilities or entitlements, well, the golden rule is what used to be the historical norm or precedent. Well, of course, that came from the Christianity side of Western societies. But because most people now reject Christianity or all the morality that is encompassed or contained within the biblical structures or scriptures, like I say, the golden rule doesn't exist anymore. And the baby boomers seem to be that first generation, well, in the modern times, that are more than willing to economically enslave their children, their grandchildren, or maybe even them born at this point in time, to maintain not just the social, political, and economic structures that they built up, but their ability to keep them going forward even when they no longer have the pretense or position of authority to do so. And Trudeau and the federal Liberals seem more than willing to go along with implementing policies that will continue that social or economic enslavement of the successive generations to prop up the entitlements of the baby boomers. Even though he himself is probably because he's about the same age as I am. Trudeau is actually a Gen Xer, but he's more than willing to, once again, sacrifice his own peeps or the millennials to keep the entitlements going for the baby boomers. But what it is Trudeau, he's a politician. He realized that the baby boomers still have, like I say, they still have lots of controls of the mechanisms and levers of power. And there's still a huge voting bloc, a huge cohort. Actually, the largest voting bloc, I believe, even today. I don't even think the millennials have enough to replace the baby boomers. Now, maybe if we Gen Xers and millennials join together and combine forces, we might be able to oppose the boomers and their top-down authoritarian impositions of their social or economic mandates or edicts. That might very well happen, but it's not going to happen under the federal Liberals, as they're saying. And if you don't already understand that, well, this is even more evidence that should alleviate you of any questions in regards to the reality or the truth of that statement. Headline out of Financial Post: Merry Christmas, Canada. It will be 22 years before Ottawa balances the budget, Finance Department reveals. So think about that. I mean, just a 22-year time frame, that's already enough to create an entire generation of people. Because most people can start to have children in their teens or their early 20s. So 22 years is enough for an entire generation to come to fruition. So to suggest that the budget's not even, and I mean, think about already that the amount of debts and deficits that are socially and economically enslaving like people like Gen Xers or the millennials. But this is even suggesting that they might even be able to offload that onto not just their kids and their grandkids, but their great-grandkids. I mean, these liberals, or even the conservatives before them, with the bailouts under the Harper regime, they're seemingly always want to offload all the social and economic responsibility to people that have had no say in the matter, who have caught or who have caused the mess that we all find ourselves currently in. Stop trying to unload your irresponsible shit to your successive generations. Do the fucking right thing, Canada. My God, what is wrong with you fucking people? Even if you're not one of those ones that are actively out there supporting this shit or promoting it, if you're sitting on the sidelines or complacent or conformist or unwilling to stand in firm opposition to this, then you, by natural extension, are showing that your compliance is one of the bases in why these central planners continue to do what they do. They're going to do it as long when they recognize that no one's willing to stand up firmly against it, or at least not enough people, they're going to do it. You have to show these central planning authoritarian hacks and sociopaths and control freaks that no, you don't get to do that. Even if I might benefit by economically enslaving my future generations, I don't want that kind of benefit. So if you remain silent and you're unwilling to say what I'm saying right fucking now in this video, then you are, once again, compliant and accomplice to all that's happening. And I hope your kids, your grandkids, and your grandkids, I hope they treat you accordingly for what you have done to them. But that's 5 years earlier than the federal government predicted last year. Now, the reason why you're getting that sub portion, and this is, like I said, a Financial Post, but you know what? Notice how the headline is. I mean, the headline sounds somewhat reasonable as far as like push back against government, but the sub portion of the headline is trying to end it on a bit of a positive note. Like, but that's 5 years earlier than the federal government predicted last year. So trying to end the headline on a positive note. And I'll tell you why that is. Because this article, even though I'm using the Financial Post rather than, it's being reported on like CBC and other platforms as well, but I'd rather use the Financial Post or Post Media if I have the chance. But the reason why you're hearing basically CBC type rhetoric contained within this article is because it's being reported by the Canadian press and only being republicized by Post Media. So it's not an article presented by an actual genuine contributor to Post Media. It's just them sharing. That's all the media does these days. A lot of them anyways, well, especially like the CBC, they just repost like the Canadian press or the AP, which is the Associated Press, which Canadian Press is basically a subsidiary of the Associated Press, or Reuters. You're talking about two investigative journalists enterprises that do most of the actual reporting, and everyone else just copies and pastes their articles and then just offers their own political rhetoric in combination with it. Anyways, like I say, so this is the Canadian press, and it's being reported December 21st, 2018. Ottawa. The Federal Finance Department doesn't expect to have a balanced budget until 2040. But that's 5 years earlier than the government predicted last year. Long-term budgetary projections released Friday morning estimate that by the end of fiscal year 2040-2041, federal books will be in surplus by $1.7 billion. I'm just thinking 2040-2041. My oldest son is 27 right now, and by 2040-2041, that will put my son, so that's about 23 years later, that puts my son at 50 years old. I'm 48. That means the budget isn't going to be balanced to my son, till my son that's in his 20s is older than I am. Put that into perspective, folks, because that's one thing the establishment media will never do, give you that true perspective of what this stuff means. They're trying to downplay it in this particular article because, like I say, it's the Canadian press. They want to alleviate you of your concerns that you should rightfully have. Because, like I say, this is immoral. It's outrageous. It's disgusting. It's vile, folks. It's vile to economically enslave successive generations. I don't know why anyone would think that that's a good strategy going forward. The Trudeau Liberals promised during the 2015 election to balance the books by the end of their mandate, 2019, after running small deficits. Yeah, what a lie that turned out to be. And not just a small white lie or a typical political lie, because that's what politics is. It's just constantly, they just lie to you constantly. And you must know this. But this isn't just a minor lie. I mean, this is, I can't even place a level. It's outrageous how much deception was involved. The government's February budget predicted a deficit of $18.1 billion for the current 2018-19 fiscal year, which ends in March. The report says federal finances appear sustainable over the long term, with the government's favored fiscal number, the federal debt as a percentage of gross domestic product, expected to decline over time. That's a way of measuring how heavy the debt burden is compared with the size of the national economy, rather than just tallying the total of federal government owes. So, sure, like the number crunchers, well, if we can economically enslave like 2 or 3 generations, hey, we can make this work. Think about that. They're trying to use the number crunching and the math, but completely rejecting and ignoring the moral aspects or implications of economically enslaving future or successive generations. And when they're talking as a measure towards GDP, what GDP is what everybody in Canada produces over the culmination of an entire year. So they're saying, well, as long as we keep the debt levels, even if people become more prosperous, well, we'll get to steal a lot more because they're more prosperous. But as long as we keep the debt levels, even though they're more prosperous, well, we get to steal more. So it's going to work out okay as long as we can steal just as much. As long as the people are making more, as long as we can steal more, we'll be able to keep things in line and okay and keep us in, wow, what are they going to say? The black? Because nobody's functioning. What do they even suggest anymore? Because even if you get to the point where the deficits stop and you're just no longer going into further debt, all those debt obligations, those are just deficit levels. The debt's always still there, right? It's not like we're not even at any point, nothing along this whole thing is even talking about starting to reduce the level of the debt. We're just talking at yearly deficits at this point in time, folks. Like I say, this shit is insane, and I'm finding it even more difficult to cover these kinds of stories anymore because, yeah, I don't know what you would call, I get triggered. No, but it's devastating, it's disturbing, even though I know this is going on and I've known it for like a decade now. I still, it should be, nothing should surprise me at this point, but for some reason, I still get outraged and shocked at the amount of corruption and immorality that I'm seeing out there on the social, political, or economic structures of this country. At this point, it's propagated through almost the entire Western world. What the hell has happened with that? What the hell? What was up with the 60s and that sex, drugs, rock and roll and all the craziness? What the fuck happened during that time frame that put these boomers in such a psychology, such a mindset that they seem to be completely unwilling to be remotely objective, compassionate, moral, ethical, or responsible in any way for what they're doing or for what they're using that big gigantic gun in the room these days. They started out with, I just want to do it I want to create equality a little bit, right? So I'm going to use the gun. You better give me. Now they're like, well, that worked. Hey, I want this. You better give me this. Hey, matter of fact, hey, I like that too. Hey, give me that. You know what? Why not? Yeah, hey, you know, I've been bored lately. Matter of fact, give me that, give me that, give me this, give me that, give me that. They got the guy in the room like, no, I'm not relinquishing. Matter of fact, since I still have control and have retained control of that guy in the room, I'm going to use it as much as I possibly can. And that's what you're seeing today. That's a representation of why there's almost a law, a rule, or regulation for almost every human activity that you could ever undertake. That's how authoritarian these people have become. Because power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And these people have had a lot of absolute power for a lot of time. The government's debt, which as of October stood at $669.5 billion, is expected to peak at almost $960 billion in the same year the budget reaches balance, the report says. That's just the federal budget. Once again, folks, you got to add in the provincial budgets. You got to add in municipal budgets. You got to add in personal and household budgets or debts and deficits. Once again, they talk as if like what do we have? Last time I checked, there's only one me. There's not 4 or 5 of me. So who are you trying to impose all these multiple levels of or layers of debts onto? There's still only so many people in this country. There's still always and forever only going to be so many people that you're going to be able to try to or attempt to offload those debt loads onto. Well, I guess maybe they're thinking what? They're going to come up with clone technology and hey, we'll make 5 Bennett's so we can tax all fucking 5 of them to pay for it. Well, I mean, I guess if that's your political or economic strategy, well, good luck with that. But the Finance Department warns the projections are based on a number of assumptions about population and economic growth, making the projects subject to a fair degree of uncertainty. Nor do they take into account any new government spending or taxes over the coming years. Anyways, I'll post a link to this article in the description below. But I mean, 2040, 2041, just to get away from spending more than they bring in as far as tax revenue. And think about how much the government brings in as far as tax revenue. Think about almost everything that you do, right? Unless you're functioning in the gray or the black market, almost everything you do, you purchase, you consume, or any service you use, you are paying a tax. And even with all of that they're stealing and plundering from the people, the productive people alive today, who are in the workforce or being taxed today, that's still not enough. Not even close to enough. And it's not even enough today. It's not even going to be enough next year. It's not going to be enough. Even with all of that, they still have to project deficits where they're spending more than they bring in all the way out to 2040 or 2041. And once again, we're still talking about deficits. Not even touching. This hasn't even touched on the actual debt. How much debt? When is the debt ever going to get paid off? When the fuck is that ever going to possibly happen? Who's going to be paying off the debts? Well, I mean, in 22, 23 years, think about it. If you're a boomer, you're already what? In your mid-50s? Even if you're the youngest boomer, you're in your mid-50s. Which means in 22, 23 years, you're almost 8. Matter of fact, you're probably already 6 feet under, right? And if you're the older generation or the older aspects of the boomers, well, you're definitely probably going to be long dead and gone. So what are you all, Keynesians? Hey, in the long run, we're all dead, so who cares, right? Let's just enjoy all the entitlements in the here and now. And who gives a shit who gets stuck paying for them? I got the benefit. I got mine. Don't give a fuck if anyone else gets theirs. I got mine. Talk about a bunch of selfish, greedy, entitled bunch. And yes, it is predominantly the baby boomers. And yes, it is predominantly us Gen Xers that are saying, yeah, we could continue this going forward. And some of them are, but I'm pushing back against my counterparts in my own demographic and saying, no, let's not continue what our parents did. Hell no. Let's do the right thing now. Let's be responsible. Let's get back to the golden rule. We're not socially or economically enslaving our children and our grandchildren. You know, the boomers might have been more than willing to do so, or at least a substantial portion of them were, but we don't have to continue or carry forward that kind of immorality. The onus is on us to put a backstop to this kind of economic enslaving of future and successive generations. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.